It was a great kingdom of the elves, home of the last High King of the Noldor. Yet, while it would be a realm of great wisdom and leaders, the rise of Sauron would bring great conflict to its borders, and eventually the fall of its king and the dwindling of his land. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the history of Lindon. While the realm of Lindon is mostly associated with the Second Age, the seeds of this realm were sown in the First. For the western lands of Lindon are the only mainland portion of Beleriand that was not destroyed in the War of Wrath. After this cataclysmic battle, the elves would build a haven in the gulf that was formed when Beleriand sank into the sea. And over the following 6,000 plus years, countless elves would sail from the Grey Havens to the uttermost west. Yet in this first year of the Second Age, most elves that survived the First Age wars did not wish to abandon the lands they had fought to defend. Thus, they would establish a new realm of the elves. They name it after the First Age land of Osiriand, whose lesser used name was Lindon. As for their leadership, they would turn to the last heir of the kings of the Noldor, Gil-galad. While in the Silmarillion, he is said to be the son of Fingon, Christopher Tolkien would later state in The Peoples of Middle-earth that he should have listed him as the son of Orodruin. But it would not only be elves that could at times be found in Lindon. For in 600 of the Second Age, the elves would receive visitors from a group of men they had not seen since their earliest days in these lands, the Edain of old, who are now known as Númenóreans. It's entirely possible that it was at the Grey Havens that the ancestors of these men sailed to discover their new land, nearly 600 years prior. And this is possibly where Elrond and his brother Elros would have parted as elf and mortal man. Gil-galad would welcome this great race of men on what would be the first of many visits of the Númenóreans to Middle-earth. In 725 of the Second Age, 125 years after their first voyage to Middle-earth, the Númenóreans would visit Lindon once again. This time, one of the sailors is Aldarion, son of King Tar-Meneldur. He would become friends with both Gil-galad and Círdan, and he would make frequent visits to the shores of Middle-earth. At the conclusion of one such journey in 882, Gil-galad would give Aldarion a letter for his father, warning him that a new shadow had arisen in the east, noting weaknesses in the defense of Eriador, and asking for Númenórean aid in facing this threat. Over the early centuries of the Second Age, many of the Teleri elves would actually leave Lindon, going to live with the Sylvan elves of Greenwood and Lorinand. Among them is Thranduil's father, Orofer, who would become king of the Woodland realm. There would also be a migration for others among the Noldor, Sindar, and Green elves, who would follow Galadriel and Celeborn into Eriador. In 750 of the Second Age, some of these Noldor would follow Celebrimbor as he goes near the dwarves of the Misty Mountains to establish a new realm, Eregion. The elves of Middle-earth would grow their kingdoms over the coming years, gaining the attention of the great enemy remaining in Middle-earth. Around 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron would put on the fair visage of Annatar, and while he found men easiest to sway, he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew the firstborn children of Ilúvatar had greater power. Thus, Annatar seeks entry into Lindon, but is denied, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him. Though he seemed fair, and they did not know who he truly was, they refused to admit him into their realm. While the elves of Lindon would not fall prey to Sauron's plans, those in Eregion would. Together with Annatar, Celebrimbor and the Smiths of Eregion would create 16 rings of power over the course of hundreds of years. As Sauron goes back to Mordor to forge his one ring, Celebrimbor makes 3 more rings, the Rings of the Elves. As Sauron's deception is discovered, Celebrimbor sends the 3 rings away, one to Galadriel in Lothlorien, and the other 2 come to Lindon, given to Gil-galad for safekeeping. Gil-galad would in turn entrust Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Círdan, while holding Vilya, the Ring of Air, himself. With Eregion coming under attack by Sauron's armies from Mordor, Gil-galad would send Elrond with a force of elves to their aid. Unfortunately, Eregion would fall in 1697, and Elrond would lead the survivors of the city north, where he would found Rivendell. Sauron's victory would open up to him the lands of Eriador, and over the next 2 years, Sauron's orcs would overrun the region. While Rivendell is under siege, Lindon faces its own challenges as well. Gil-galad and his people would barely hold the line at the River Lune. It would seem the elves were facing a losing battle, and it was only a matter of time until they would all fall to Sauron's superior forces. However, in this most desperate time, a fleet would arrive at the Grey Havens. Numenor had come. This fleet had been sent by Tar Minastir, the heir of Queen Tar Telperion, the great-great-granddaughter of Tar Aldarion. Sauron suffers heavy losses and is forced to retreat southeast. Making a stand at Sarn Ford, he is defeated once again. Though he is reinforced, the elves and men would defeat him once again in the Battle of Gwathlo, thanks to a second force of Numenor sent in secret to Londair. With Sauron defeated for a time, the wise of Middle-earth would meet to discuss what had transpired and what moves to make going forward. This group, made of wise men and elves of the age, would decide Imladris would be maintained as a stronghold in eastern Eriador, replacing Eregion. In secret, Gil-galad gives to Elrond the elven ring, Vilya, and after this loss, Sauron would forever harbor a hatred of the men of Numenor. Over the coming centuries, Sauron would take hold of the lands of the east and south, and even some of the westlands, known as the Dark Years, where the orcs would greatly multiply and the enemy's tyranny would reign. Lindon would see many flee to their lands. As the elves are hunted by the Dark Lord, they seek the safety of Gil-galad's realm, which remained beyond Sauron's reach. These days of flight saw many elves take refuge in Lindon, and some would finally abandon Middle-earth, sailing from the Grey Havens to Valinor. Sauron's power would only grow for many long years, yet so would the power of Numenor. And in 3262 of the Second Age, its 25th king, Ar-Pharazôn, would launch an invasion of Sauron's lands. After his own followers abandoned him, Sauron would surrender to Pharazôn and go back to Numenor as a prisoner. This development is a gift to the people of the Westlands, as they are finally left in relative peace. Gil-galad, as a result, is able to extend his power and influence. It is said that he would not only control most of Eriador, but all the way to the borders of Greenwood. However, this would all end some 57 years later. The first indication of evil deeds would have likely come to Lindon in the form of the sea itself, for the waters would ride in upon the land, covering some of the coastlands of Lindon, never to be seen again. The cause of this displacement of the sea is the sinking of the entire island of Numenor. Lindon would not only lose some of its land, but Sauron's return to Middle-earth would bring yet another rise of the Dark Lord. Still, their great allies of old were not wholly destroyed. Elendil would lead a group of 4 ships fleeing the downfall. They would travel to the Gulf of Lune and up the Lune River. There, Elendil would meet and befriend High King Gil-galad. While the threat of Sauron would rise in time, so would a new ally kingdom, Arnor. Elendil's realm, along with his son's kingdom of Gondor in the south, would be pivotal in the battles to come. As a gift to Elendil, Gil-galad would construct 3 tall towers in the Emin Bereid. Within one of the towers, Elendil would store one of the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones rescued from Numenor. 110 years after the fall of Numenor, Sauron would finally move against the Free Peoples once more. He moves against Isildur and Anarion's realm of Gondor, launching an attack upon Minas Ithil. Isildur would flee, sailing to the north to bring word to his father. Hearing the news, Elendil and Gil-galad would meet at the watchtower of Aman-Sul and form the last alliance of elves and men. As we've discussed in other videos, this great alliance would go on to Rivendell, where they would plan their attack upon Mordor. Finally, in 3441, Gil-galad and Elendil would come face to face with Sauron himself. At the cost of their own lives, they would throw down Sauron's physical form, giving Isildur the chance to take his ring. Gil-galad was said to have been killed by the heat of Sauron's fiery hand, and so passes the High King and ruler of Lindon. After Sauron's defeat and the fall of their High King, the realm of Lindon would dwindle. Not only were some of the Noldor lost during the war, but many of these elves would finally decide to leave Middle-earth and take the voyage into the west. While technically next in line to do so, Elrond would not take the title of High King of the Noldor, though he would remain a great leader in Eriador. As for Lindon, it would be ruled from this time on by Círdan, who would serve as Lord of the Havens. 1,000 years into the Third Age, Círdan would receive 3 Istari, who sailed from Valinor to Middle-earth, landing at the Grey Havens. While in some accounts the number of Istari here is 5, Tolkien's later writings state the Blue Wizards would have come around 1600 of the Second Age, alongside the great elf Glorfindel. Upon meeting Gandalf, Círdan would give to him Narya, his Ring of Power, to aid the wizard in his efforts against Sauron. Though Lindon is diminished in power, it would still prove to be a valuable ally to the heirs of Elendil. For in the Angmar Wars of the Mid-Third Age, the elves of Lindon would frequently aid the men of Arnor, often in partnership with the elves of Rivendell. The elves of Lindon would attempt to rescue the last king of the remnants of Arnor in 1975. Sailing from the Grey Havens, they would go to the ice bay of Forochel. While they would find King Arvedui, the ship was doomed, and all aboard would perish in the sea. The next year would bring a conclusion to this centuries-long war, as a great Gondorian host would sail from their ports in the south up to the Grey Havens. So great was this force that it not only filled this port, but also Forlond and Harlond. While the elves of Rivendell would also aid the men, we are told Círdan led the host of the West to victory at the Battle of Fornost. This battle, which also featured hobbit archers, would prove crushing for the Witch King of Angmar. His forces of orcs and men would be totally destroyed, and he would be forced to flee back to Mordor. Later, in 1318, after the One Ring had been revealed, Círdan would send an elf named Galdor to Rivendell. His true purpose was to represent Círdan at the Council of Elrond, where the fate of the One Ring would be decided. The Havens would also come into play after the final downfall of Sauron. Many of the few remaining Noldor would finally leave Middle-earth behind, sailing from Círdan's realm. And on September 22, 3021, Círdan would see the ring-bearers board the White Ship. Among these great allies were Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, and Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. Likely diminished even more in the Fourth Age, Círdan would continue to lead whatever remained of Lindon from the Grey Havens. He would likely have also seen Samwise Gamgee sail west some 61 years after Frodo. Eventually, however, the Grey Havens would have no further purpose in Middle-earth, for a day would come when no more elves wished to make the journey to Valinor. So, at some unknown date, decades later into the Fourth Age, Círdan would take the last ship, which he had constructed. Joined by Celeborn, they would take the straight road to the Undying Lands, leaving the lands of Lindon and the Grey Havens behind. Like many other elven realms, it would presumably cease to be in the Fourth Age. Itself a remnant of the elven glory of the First Age, Lindon would dwindle throughout its history, though it would never cease to aid the free peoples in the struggle against the dark powers of Middle-earth. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Freya Firestar, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.